Tonight, we have something a little bit special, a whole hour of stories detailing different entities. A huge thank you to all of tonight's authors for making this video possible. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is of course as well. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. My mother died when I was 6. No one knew what happened. She's survived by the 3 of us, my dad Nathaniel, my sister Chauncey, and me, Lucas. We were never religious until we were compelled to be. I once read a story on Reddit about a lonely man who didn't believe in God, until one night when he found himself gazing at a skinless, black figure with no eyes standing by his bedroom door. In that moment, he said he had no choice but to pray to God. My dad and I have no idea how Chauncey came to be possessed. Yeah, that's right. My sister was possessed by a demon at one point in my life. My uncle and a neighbor were present during the exorcism. We needed the muscle. Father Elio arrived at 10 p.m. "Father, bless you and thank you for coming," Uncle Roland said earnestly. He took the priest's coat and closed the front door immediately, so as to not allow the night's cold breeze inside. Our home was cold enough. "Nathaniel, everything is going to be fine," Father Elio reassured the mess that was my dad that night. I'd never seen my dad sob like that before. His face was as red as a tomato, but every time he caught me looking at him, he pulled himself back together. Father Elio scanned the room in a manner that I can only describe as authoritative. My dad wasn't in control, and my uncle wasn't either. No, it was Father Elio who was in control. "And you are?" "Oh, I'm their neighbor John. Thought you guys could use some help." "That's kind of you, John. God bless you for this," said Father Elio approvingly, nodding his head. John smiled and seemed to blush like a girl. He's a Catholic man himself. Father Elio is a tall man who stands at 6 feet and 2 inches. He had this salt and pepper colored hair that indicated his older age, along with the wisdom that comes with it. "Before we go upstairs," the sound of something like heavy furniture moving interrupted Father Elio. All of our eyes snapped up at the closed bedroom door upstairs. My dad motioned to run up there and check on my sister, but was stopped by Uncle Roland, his brother. Once again, the sound of heavy objects in motion rumbled throughout the 2-story home. John made the sign of the cross in fear. Sometimes, when I think back on this night, I laugh to myself. Poor John, who was just trying to be a good neighbor, was absolutely petrified, even though he came over voluntarily. And the thing is, he wouldn't leave no matter how scared he was. After all, Father Elio gave him that honorable compliment. What would you think of John if he just got up and booked it? "Before we go upstairs, you should all be informed on some matters. Time is not on our side tonight, so I cannot explain everything, but I will tell you this. You must not, under any circumstances, speak to it. You are not speaking to Chauncey, you are speaking to evil, and you should never speak to evil. Whether it asks you a question or taunts you, or whether you yourself wish to ask or taunt it, simply don't speak." We all nodded our heads, and everyone seemed to take the father's warning as common sense. He continued, "Stay away from the window." Again, we all agreed to obey. "Now, before we go upstairs, I must warn you of one other thing." Father Elio took a few steps forward and gestured us to come closer. "Is there anything that anyone wishes to confess right now?" We traded looks of confusion with one another, and then set our eyes back on him. "You see, demons are spirits, and as such, they know things beyond our comprehension. They don't know everything. No, only God Almighty knows everything. However, for some reason, they know of certain things you may have done throughout your life, and the only way to keep them from exposing those things is to confess that sin. I can't tell you the many times during exorcisms when the deepest and darkest secrets of those in the room were exposed by demons. For some people, it brought them great shame. For others, it ruined their lives. However, if you confess your sins with me, which we can do right now in the kitchen, then that demon upstairs, or any other evil spirit in that room, has no right to accuse you before God. So please, for your guys' sake, let's get this done." One by one, we walked over to the kitchen and Father Elio heard our confessions. It took about 15 minutes, then we headed upstairs. The bedroom was made as empty as possible except for a table Father Elio needed for his things. Holy water, Bible, crucifix, and whatnot. Chauncey wasn't restrained with ropes as my dad wouldn't allow it. Uncle Roland and John were kneeling down on either side of her bed and holding on to her wrists. Time was not wasted. Father Elio stood over my sister and began praying, switching words between English and Latin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. My dad began crying for my sister as she resisted the words of the priest. She spat on his purple stole and cursed him, saying and uttering things so perverted and so evil, all in a voice unlike that of a 19-year-old girl. My dad scratched at his white-brown patch of a beard in distress. "Stop it. That's enough, Father." My dad suddenly cried out. Uncle Roland gestured to me with a nod of his head to go and comfort my dad, as he and John wouldn't let go of my increasingly violent sister, but John almost did let go. Chauncey slowly turned her head towards John, her eyes wide and her lips forming an uncomfortable smile on her pale face. "John the cheater, John the cheater, you lying pig," Chauncey yelled at the top of her lungs. Her words echoed loudly against the wooden walls of the empty bedroom. "You gonna tell your wife, Johnny boy? You gonna tell her what you did with Michelle from work?" John looked up at Father Elio for reassurance, trying to remember and heed his words from earlier. John put his head down in shame, still gripping Chauncey's left wrist. Was it true? Did John cheat on his wife? I don't know, but man's reaction to strangers exposing their secrets is often telling, and John's reaction was very telling. Father Elio flicked more holy water on my sister's face, reminding us all to remember what he had said earlier. Ignore, just ignore. One moment during the exorcism, Uncle Roland and I caught eyes. He didn't look confident anymore. His big, hazel eyes became watery, and a few tears raced down his cheeks. He had taken off his jacket before preparing to restrain Chauncey, only to reveal a sweat-dampened shirt. With one hand, he reached for his ball cap and put it back on, lowering the top to cover his eyes. He looked as if he was preparing for something. He looked guilty. Chauncey began screaming and throwing violent fists, and if a complete stranger had entered the room at that moment, they would have chuckled to themselves before dismissing the scene as a film shoot. Father Elio asked us all to pray with him as he picked up a metal crucifix. We all did as he told us and prayed under our breaths, with the voice of the Father leading. Chauncey twitched her hand towards Uncle Roland, who was looking down at the mattress as he prayed. He tried to ignore. We all tried to ignore. Well, it would be more appropriate. But I could never bring myself to call my sister that, no matter how unrecognizable she was that night. I knew she was still in there. Chauncey spat on Uncle Roland's face. "Pig, why don't you tell everyone here what you did last night?" She looked around, scanning the room with a grin on her face. She looked like a child who was eager to share her newly found secret. "Disgusting, folks. It's disgusting," she said while laughing, but in a deep voice, akin to that of a heavy-built man. Uncle Roland looked as if he was ready to get up and leave, but he didn't, and thank God for that. Father Elio had warned us to confess all of our major sins. If not, he explained, then the unconfessed sin, having not been forgiven by God, could possibly be available to the demon for exposing, and not just before God, who sees all, but also before our fellow man. I, for one, confessed all my major sins that night in the kitchen. I hadn't done much at 17. The demon was torturing Uncle Roland, mentally. It wouldn't tell us what he had done. That was so disgusting. Instead, Chauncey, or it, kept threatening to reveal his secret to the entire room, but would stop and say, maybe in another 30 minutes. The doorbell rang from downstairs. "Don't," Father Elio warned sternly. "It's playing tricks, trying to distract us. No one is there." My dad stood near the open bedroom door, almost hiding behind it, he was so scared. "Father Elio," Chauncey said suddenly, "what about you? Nothing to hide? Hypocrite. You creatures are not so different, if not even worse than us. That's why God throws you in hell along with us. You're not above us, See? You're pathetic. Chauncey's eyes widened abnormally. Her mouth remained open as she cut herself off from finishing that sentence. Her thin eyebrows rose, and her head shifted slowly to the left. She was looking at my dad. Our dad. The room fell silent, and it remained silent for a few moments, until Chauncey finally spoke. "You sick bastard," she said with a mild chuckle. She opened her mouth as if to gasp. "Like I said, folks, we aren't so different." My dad was shaking. Uncle Roland and John kept restraining, and Father Elio continued praying. Oh, this one I shan't keep to myself. Nay, nay, I say," Chauncey yelled excitedly. Goodness, it was weird, seeing my sister act like that. I knew it wasn't her, but it didn't fail to irk me anyway. She continued, "Lucas, you're such a good boy. Look at you, all sparkling clean after your little confession downstairs." Then she looked straight at me, lowering her eyebrows. "I'll get you next time, but for now, I want to ask our dad Nathaniel hiding behind the door over there what I'm talking about." "Lies," my dad suddenly screamed. "Father of lies. Isn't that right, Elio? Isn't that right? The devil is a liar. He's a liar. How can we believe a word that comes out of his rotten mouth? How?" My dad's reaction. It was telling. He made the same face and had the same mannerisms of Uncle Roland and John, but more extreme. And although the devil is indeed the father of lies, our actions speak louder than anything that could have slithered out of that demon's mouth. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked. "Whatever it says, we'll just ignore it, okay?" I looked over at Uncle Roland and John. There was no need to look at Father Elio, who, throughout the exorcism, seemed disappointed in us. He did warn them to confess after all. "Nathaniel," Chauncey said tauntingly, "are you ready?" My dad was pulling at his hair. His face was a deep red, and spit came from his mouth with every word. He looked just as possessed as his daughter was that night. Screw off, it's not true. Shut up." "Dad, please, just calm down. Just tell us what it is before she does. Get in front of this, Dad," I cried out. We ignored Father Elio and his repeated reminders not to speak with the demon. My dad fell to his knees, with the floorboard sounding a single, quiet creak. "It was an accident, okay? I didn't mean to do it, but she made me so angry. Son, surely you know that. Surely you know I didn't mean to take your mother away from you. But she made me so angry. So angry. We were in the garage one night. That's when I had to do it. So I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox, and that was the end of it. To think I've been living under the same roof with a murderer. Well, spare you the rest. And in doing so, I will have spared myself. My dad's confession to murdering my mother was shocking, and my sister and I haven't recovered since. Demons are tricky. They're playful too. And if they can get you to admit to something wicked you've done, something that they didn't even know about, it's all the more fun to them. After Dad had finished his half-sob and half-anger-induced confession, the demon spoke through my sister one last time before finally leaving. "Nathaniel, I had no idea you murdered your wife, silly. I was just going to tell everyone about that one time when you used God's name in vain." I am writing this warning for 2 reasons. 1, you must be careful of the ringing and the creatures that use it to hunt. 2, we need more hunters to join us. For these reasons, I will explain what the ringing is, and share one of my experiences so that you can decide if you want to help. Not all can help us. Therefore, I will include the requirements. Even if you can't help, read carefully so that you don't fall victim to them. First, I'll explain what the ringing is. When you sit in a room that has little to no sound, sometimes you will hear a ringing or buzzing. That sound is always there. You can't hear it with the louder sounds drowning it out. The noise is how they hunt. No one has ever bothered to tell me what they are called, or if they have a name. They did tell me that they are ancient beings that have hunted humans for our entire existence. They are the reason some people have disappeared without a trace, or been found murdered with no suspects. If you hear ringing, go to a room with more sound, play music, start a conversation, anything to drown out the ringing. Some are talented enough to ignore the ringing and be fine. I don't suggest that. You could fall victim to them. If you listen to it, a few different things can happen. You might hear them speaking to you, which will make you go crazy. They may draw you into their world, where they will most likely consume you if you're not found by one of us. The other thing that may happen is how you will know you can help us. You listen to the ringing and close your eyes. When the ringing stops, you will either be in their world or still on your own. Both are helpful. We have cheesy names for both positions. The Freers and the Seers. I am a Freer. I go into their world to save people and hunt those things. I have to be called by a Seer to be able to do my job. The Seers are able to find if there is a creature close by, while I refer to them as different worlds. They are almost the same. It is kind of like they are just different frequencies within the same space. Only the people who do this job know the real difference. Normal people find out the difference when they are trapped by a creature. They will be able to see the creature, but not be able to speak or be seen by any people around them. I found out by accident that I was a Freer. I would have died if a Seer hadn't sensed me and sent another Freer to find me. This is not that experience though. I prefer not to remember that moment. My last time in their world was to save a small group of campers who had wandered too far from any sounds. They had been taken by two creatures into their world. We had to have a couple of Seers track them down. When we did, I started the process to travel. When I heard the ringing, I closed my eyes and waited. I made sure to keep my weapons close to me. I carry a small sword and a gun with me every time I travel. The sword is for killing, and the gun is my favorite way to come back to our world. When I arrived within their frequency, I had to do a little more tracking of my own. Within their space, the ringing works against them and lets me find them. I followed the ringing and stared down the alley it was coming from. I never have liked fighting these things in confined spaces. I quickly put on my noise-canceling earbuds. The main way these creatures fight is by sound. They can bust your eardrums or even damage your nerves. That's why I have to wear padded clothing as well. I saw them soon after that, but they hadn't seen me yet. The first time I saw them, I thought something was wrong with my eyes. They are vaguely humanoid with elongated limbs. They have sharp teeth and nails to rip their favorite parts out of humans. They have a feature that messes with your eyes, so you can't look directly at them for too long. They continuously vibrate at a high rate. It makes them look fuzzy and distorts the colors and shapes around them. It takes a lot of practice to take them down. 3 of the campers quivered at the feet of these creatures. It was obvious how terrified they were. A little further, I could see the bloodied body of the 4th camper. Unfortunately, we hadn't found them in time. But 3 out of 4 is a high success rate. Most of the time, we only find 1 or 2 alive out of a group or just pieces of a single victim. We find most of the survivors by accident on patrol. I rushed forward and sliced through the neck of the creature closest to me. Its head rolled to the campers, and one of them would have shrieked if the organic sound was not muted here. It came out as a squeak. I'm embarrassed to say I did not finish the other one quite as fast. I had too much momentum going, and had tripped over my own feet. I had stared too long at the creatures, and misjudged their placement. It turned on me, and opened its mouth to screech at me. It screeches like a sonic wave and pushed me into the wall behind me. It swiped at me with its claws, leaving strips of fabric and a trail of blood running down my stomach. I had barely dodged in time. It opened its mouth again. One swift kick knocked it off balance, enough to keep it from attacking. I jumped on it and thrust the sword forward. I missed. Its vibrations were still messing with my eyes. I leapt back and chanced a moment to close my eyes and reset my vision. I felt it brush my clothes and open my eyes. I lifted the sword and thrust it through its neck, the only weak spot on the creature. It fell at my feet. My earbuds had fallen out, and I heard ringing again. It was coming from the entrance of the alley. Many more of those creatures had come, attracted by the noise. I rushed to the campers and told them to hold on. I couldn't take their friend with me. It was too far away. I raised my gun, and a loud bang pulled us back into our world. We were back in the same room I had started my journey. The seers rushed to check on us and tended to any wounds. We were mostly fine. One of the campers had been cut in the neck and wouldn't be able to talk again. She was relieved to be alive though. My injury wasn't very serious. I will be able to go back with a group of freers. Everyone is alarmed at the number I saw at the alley. The creatures usually don't gather into large groups. We think they are planning something. If they are, everyone is in danger. If you think you can help, please reach out to me. Do not try to reach their space yourself. If you happen to find yourself there, follow one of the 2 methods of return. If you can make a loud noise, someone won't help since sound is muted. Inorganic sounds like gunshots or large objects falling will work. It's almost like it shocks you back into our frequency. This way is good if you're being hunted. It's the quickest way. The second way is meditation. You have to sit still and focus on returning home. This method takes a while and can be unreliable. It doesn't work if you have a hard time focusing or are panicking. Remember to never listen to the ringing. You can't help the crazy ones because sometimes they turn into these creatures. We will do whatever we have to in order to keep their numbers from increasing. So, know this. If you succumb, we will kill you. Be careful. I woke up at 7:15 a.m. to a weather alert on my phone. Severe thunderstorm warning. I brushed it off, thinking it's just the weather app getting my location wrong again. It looks clear outside through my window, but I guess that doesn't mean one can't move in. After eating breakfast, I still really didn't see any signs of clouds, so I thought my theory was right. I decided I could just go in and play some video games until lunch. After about 4 hours of games, I noticed it had gotten pretty dark out. I walked over to the window and saw that a shelf cloud had moved over my house. I knew that this meant some really bad storm was about to show up. I started preparing my house for the storm when I heard lightning strike not too far from my house. I looked outside and saw a wall of rain coming towards me. I went to the front door and locked it. Then I turned off most of the lights and decided I would just wait it out. About 15 minutes later, the rain was coming down so hard I couldn't see my car parked in the driveway. It sounded like TV static was blaring through loudspeakers everywhere. It was so loud. I went and got my phone and headphones so I could listen to music to drown out the torrential hell that was going on outside. I guess I had fallen asleep because I heard a really loud noise that jolted me awake. I thought that the storm had made a tree fall over or something. I checked my phone on the way over to the window, and I saw that I had been asleep for 3 hours, and the rain was still coming down as hard, if not harder than before. I thought it was a little strange that the rain was still pouring like this for a few hours straight. I looked outside to see what made the noise when my eyes locked onto something. In the front yard, I could barely make out the figure of something tall standing by my car. It looked like a telephone pole, but it was extremely thin and had branches coming off the sides of it. I thought that somehow the storm had blown some tower into my yard somehow, when all of a sudden it started to move. This thing bent down towards my front door, and I saw it was almost like a stick man. It moved really quickly, almost too fast for me to register that it was now staring at me through the window. As soon as I stared into its dark eyes, it let out this horrific wail. It was deafening, to say the least. As soon as it stopped the monstrous scream, it started searching for a way in. It's been 10 minutes since it broke in, and I'm hiding in the basement. There's no way out other than the door up the stairs, and I've heard it going through every room. I think this is the only one left. I need help. Please. I see you, she said from the closet, which seemed to be the only place she ever wanted to be. Weird selection if you asked me. There are way more interesting places to be in my house. I glanced in her direction, as if she'd be suddenly less terrifying. Plot twist? She wasn't. Still just a floating head with arms sprouting from where her ears should be. I'd put a fair amount of thought into what she could be, and still came up fucking empty. As a pretty committed atheist, maybe former atheist, I don't know. The whole haunting thing has put a pretty big hitch in my plans. I never really thought about the possibility of having to decide when the time came, but she's here. Has been for 23 days now. She never really does much. but I guess when you're a partially disembodied head, you don't really have to put much thought into it. Psychological torture must be a real gut buster. I glanced to my right again. Yep, still there. Partially obscured by my clothes, she waves her hand and smiles. I'm a big fan of horror flicks, and I've always chuckled when the main character cries out, "What do you want from me?" when confronted by a villain, or ghost, or whatever. But would you believe I've done that very same thing at least half a dozen times since she showed up? She never answers. I've discovered over the past few weeks that she's not much of a conversationalist. I'm ordering pizza. You want anything? I inquired of my demon. I know the whole no stomach thing probably complicates things, but just figured I'd ask. I'm going to kill you. She grinned. I instinctively recoiled. She really was a creep. I scoffed. Get on with it then. Despite what my sense of humor would lead you to believe, I wasn't truly suicidal, but I'd never admit that to her. I kind of figured she didn't break through the gates of hell to offer intellectually stimulating conversation, but honestly, the whole threat of murder was becoming redundant. Come up with a new line already. Going to peel the flesh from your bones. Going to stick my arm down your throat and pull out your innards. I do have to admit, that one disturbed me. God, can you imagine? Her arm crammed down your throat while you lay flail, her cheek resting on yours. But she never actually moved from the closet, so I wasn't really buying it. She had threatened physical annihilation at least 100 times since she showed up, but she never followed through. Head lady was all talk. Sad, really. It's time, she muttered, with enough conviction to give me goosebumps. Okay, so maybe I was being a bit cavalier about the whole demon thing, but still, she's never moved from the closet, so why would she start now? Oh, shit. She was pushing the clothes aside. I was rather disappointed that I was going to be murdered before I could finally pick out a decent t-shirt again. I chose you, darling, and I will drag your soul to the underworld. A bit cliche, but she certainly got the point across. Listen, I said while raising my hands, we can talk this out. What the hell did I say to her? I didn't know. And while I didn't really have a good grasp on what a soul actually was, I figured it was at least moderately important. She continued to walk, or crawl, towards me. And at this point I decided it was time to get the fuck out of there. I stood and made a beeline for the door. Apparently she could fly, so the whole crawl/walk thing was for dramatic effect. I ducked down when she flew over me, and felt my sweater ruffle. She was back not even a second later, and I swatted at her like she was a mosquito, and not a member of Satan's army. She bit me, was actually fucking chewing me, gnawing away at my forearm like it was a piece of beef jerky. I was absolutely wailing. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I grabbed the closest thing to me and silently cursed myself for not having more blunt objects around. I swung a throw pillow like my eternal soul depended on it. Obviously, the pillow didn't inflict the pain I was hoping for, but I did whack her pretty good in the eye. Point from me. She released me. I threw my fist up. My left one. The right one was looking pretty rough, and actually cheered. Fuck yeah. I was about to make it out of this. While she hovered there, I raced for the door, and surprisingly made it out of the room. I did have the foresight to close the door behind me. I sprinted towards the kitchen looking to upgrade the pillow. I didn't have the best cutlery. I'm poor as hell. This is also why I didn't just up and move when a traveler from another dimension decided to take up residence in my closet. I figured a steak knife would do the trick. As soon as I opened the drawer, I heard the door open again. The silverware clattered as I searched for a knife. Where did I leave it? I'll bet it's in the sink. Found it. I gripped the handle and wished I had time to wipe my hand on my jeans. I spun around fast enough to make myself dizzy. She lunged towards me and I ducked again, but this time I shoved the knife into her chin. Using both hands, I grimaced and shoved it all the way down to the hilt. I was impressed with my own dedication. I had no idea if one stab would do it, so I pulled the blade back out and was hit with a pretty large amount of blood on my hand. I crawled out from under her and scooted against the kitchen wall, smearing red on the linoleum. I ran my fingers through my hair and felt warm liquid squish between my fingers. I threw up on the spot. I'm sure by this point that I was looking pretty goddamn crazy. I heard a thump and looked towards Head Lady. She lay on the floor, bleeding. Her arms twitched like a half-dead spider's. "What the hell are you?" I screamed for what I was sure would be the last time. Blood bubbled from her mouth, and her eyes closed. I'll never know. I shrugged, sending tiny drips of blood to splatter my kitchen appliances. At least she's dead. Hell of a cleanup job later, though. I grabbed her arms. Well, by grabbed her arms, I mean I gripped her wrist with one hand and muttered, "You," the entire time I was dragging her to the basement. Thump thump went her head down the stairs, her hair trailing behind. I let go of her hand. I wiped my hand on my pants. I glanced around for something to store her in. I know the fact I wanted to keep this corpse probably seems a bit mental, but it meant I knew she was dead, that she couldn't come back. And so I finally noticed an old dog cage the previous owner left behind, and after determining that it was indeed a high-quality dog cage, I dragged it back to where head lady now rested. I opened the small door and nudged her inside, while muttering obscenities. One of her elbows got caught, but I had her in the cage with the door locked behind within a few minutes. I was even able to find some zip ties, and put about a dozen along the door because I was pretty sure if she ever did come back, she could figure out how to open a dog cage. It really didn't take a genius. And so, with that done, I had a quick mental breakdown and then eventually went back upstairs, and life went on. It even eventually got to the point where I wasn't waking up in terror screaming about a floating head. Life got better. It had been 6 months since I battled an otherworldly asshole, but still, I checked the basement occasionally to make sure she was still dead. She always was. That is, until last Tuesday. I walked down the stairs and walked towards the cage with my hands clenched. This shit always freaked me out. As I rounded the corner, I froze. There she was, alive, with her hands wrapped around the tiny bars of the cage like a prisoner awaiting release, grinning her impossibly horrific grin. "I see you." It won't stop. God, please help me, for it will not stop. The scratching is at its worst point. It's such a horrid sound, one of the worst I've ever heard before. Sometimes I can hear it whisper things like, "Let me in," or "I can hear you breathing." Anyways, let me explain. A few weeks ago I was on my way home from working the night shift. I was exhausted as always and immediately went to my room. After playing Skyrim for a while, I decided to head to bed. At about 3:09 a.m., I heard scratching at my door. At first I thought it was my dog, Scooby, so I called his name, only to see him come out from under my bed and jump on me. If Scooby was right here, then what was that at the door? The scratching grew more and more intense every minute. It felt like it lasted so long, probably because it did. It kept me up all night, and stopped at around 6 a.m. I was scared shitless when I got out of bed. When I opened the door, nothing was there. The same thing happened the next night. That night, I didn't even get a minute of sleep. The terror was just taking over. However, the next night, I was sick of it. I was playing a game on Xbox, waiting for it to start again. Sure enough, it did. But this time I wasn't gonna have it. As soon as I heard the scratching start, I opened the door. What I saw is forever engraved into my mind. I was face to face with a terrifying creature, the kind you see in the movies, staring into my soul. It was probably about 3 or 4 feet tall, pitch black eyes that will haunt me forever. It looked like it was hunched over on all fours. It said, "Finally decided to let me in, eh?" With a devilish smile. I immediately slammed the door. The next day I gathered all my items and moved back in with my mom. I was so relieved to be out of there. My mom said I could sleep in my old bedroom. I slept good that night, until it happened again. That same scratching. It would not stop. I began to just sob, when all of a sudden the whispering started. It gave me chills. "Well, if you won't let me in, maybe your mother will." Then the scratching stopped. I bolted out of my room and went to make sure my mom was safe. She was. Or so I thought. I saw something sleeping in her bed. Assuming it was her, I left. Well, that was probably the biggest mistake of my life. When I woke up the next morning, I went downstairs and decided to make my mom breakfast in bed. When I finished, I walked upstairs and walked into her room, breakfast in hand. Well, now, breakfast not in my hand. I dropped it all after seeing what I had seen. There was blood everywhere. My mom was laying on the floor, slashed into 2 pieces. I was in complete shock. It was so bloody. It was most definitely that creature who killed her. I began to just bawl my eyes out. I couldn't sleep after that, minus the scratching. It was torture. I don't really know what to do anymore because no matter where I go, I know that thing will follow me, haunting me forever, causing me utter pain no matter what. It was a feeling like no other. True fear. Not your average horror movie fear, but true fear. Like any breath could be your last. Like any moment your heart will stop, and you will become nothing but a faded memory to only your closest of friends and family. This all started in 1997, when I was 15, and working only for cigarette money and a reason to be out later than I should. The specific nights I had to stay late to do maintenance. Lane 27's pin setters were messing up, and not accepting the 5-pin, and messing up some old guy's perfect game. The way my bowling alley was set up was that you walked into the front door, you passed the pro shop, and then walk right between the front desk and the snack bar. I was on a platform next to the pin setter. When I dropped my screwdriver, it made a loud thunk as the resin handle hit the thin maple boards. I hopped off the platform and walked down the thin, as in barely able to walk through without slicing my side on machinery. I walked through the door and hopped across a few lanes until I got to 27. I got down on my hands and knees and reached blindly for the screwdriver. Nothing. I laid on my stomach and saw nothing but the back hall of the alley. I was just about to get up when I saw something sprint past inhumanly fast. I sprung to my feet. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my Swiss Army knife and my worn silver Zippo. I struck the flint and a small orange glow erupted from it, illuminating a small path in front of me. I slowly walked my way back to the door that led behind the machines. I pushed the door open and almost threw my knife at it as it creeped out. I quickly stepped around the corner when I saw it. The most disgusting thing I've ever seen, and most likely will ever see. It looked like a burn victim. The closest thing I can compare it to is Freddy Krueger from the 2010 remake. He had what looked like exposed bone coming out of every joint. He smiled, a nasty, toothy grin. I stumbled back on my heels as he began to full tilt sprint towards me. I got up as quick as I could, Swiss Army knife open, and pointed at it. He lifted his arm as he got closer to me. I ducked as he violently yanked his arm down on where I was standing. I jammed the knife into his side. Once, twice, 3 times. It let out an ear-piercing screech of pain. I tackled it back as he stabbed me in the leg with a screwdriver I had dropped. I jumped back, cutting my side on some of the machinery. He jumped on top of me and tried to bring the screwdriver into my cornea. I blocked it with one arm and grabbed its head and smashed into a bracket of the pin setter. It let out another screech of pain. I slammed its head back into the bracket again. It went limp. I crawled out from underneath it. That's when I blacked out a small bit. I don't remember limping to the desk phone and calling the police. I don't remember limping outside, sitting against the wall and lighting a cigarette. The next thing I remember is Officer Miller and I walking back to the back hall, looking for the body. I opened the door and walked in. When Officer Miller turned the corner and shined his flashlight on where the thing had laid, a cigarette dropped out of my mouth. It was gone. I kept the story a secret my whole life. I'm 22 now. This happened more than a decade ago, and I still have clear and vivid memories of this day. I miss my parents so much, and wish I never did what I did that afternoon. I had a nice family. I had a mom, a dad, and a sister, but yet my parents are the ones I miss most. We all lived in a nice cozy cabin in Alaska, United States, near a dense and long-stretched forest. Usually my parents would take walks just to admire the beautiful snow and cold weather. My dad was a lumberjack, and my mom was a normal housewife. We had such a perfect life before the incident happened. One morning I woke up to my sister yelling at my parents because she hated living here. I gave her the benefit of the doubt because she was 19 years old and had her own car but no friends due to us being isolated for miles. This argument went on for 20 minutes before I heard a door shut very loudly. I rushed downstairs to see what had happened, and my mom was crying because my sister had left our family to move more in the city in a different state. My dad still had to hear this news due to him still cutting trees into smaller pieces out back. I rushed outside and I saw my sister. She wasn't actually going to the car but instead going into the forest. I knew it. My kind sister would never leave us. I decided to follow her and see what she was up to. I quickly put on my jacket, boots, gloves, and snow pants and went into the forest. As soon as I went outside, I realized only one car was in front of our house. It seemed weird, but I just thought Dad had to run to the store and do a few errands, so I ran towards where I last saw my sister. Once I was inside the forest, I realized it stretched longer than I thought it would, and weirdly enough, there was a path leading straight. I thought my dad cut these trees due to me being little and not really knowing much about lumberjacks. I went on, and when I turned back, I could still see the house. I knew I would be safe. I would just plead with my sister not to leave, and everything would be alright. I wish it was that easy. I walked for what seemed like forever when I heard a familiar voice. My sister, I thought, and started running towards that voice but came to a stop. In front of me were long, white, and clean bones shaped like an old Native American roof. There was one thing that stood out with these bones. My sister's pink and gold necklace, which had her name on it. I read it, and it was her name. Now I was getting scared. I turned around to see my house nowhere. I was lost. I shouted, "Mom, Dad," but nobody came. I ran in what seemed like a loop for 5 minutes when I heard footsteps. The footsteps seemed like that of a large creature. I ducked behind a log that had fallen and hid to not show myself. I peeked through holes in the log and saw it. The creature, it was black head to toe, had blood dripping down its half-torn face. It had large, bulging, almost human-like eyes. It was standing upright. It looked almost 7 feet. The scariest thing was, I could see the creature's ribs, heart, and what looked like lungs still beating and perfectly in sync. I almost screamed at the sight of its nails. They were long and had points on them. The creature looked around, and when I blinked, it wasn't there. And I thought, maybe I'm just imagining weird things. I tried to laugh it off, but the thought stayed at the back of my head. I had enough and decided to run backwards again. This went on for another 5 minutes. When I heard my mom's voice, I ran towards it, and it was near the bones I saw earlier, but the closer I got, the more it seemed strange. Mom's voice was usually kind and soft, as well as comforting, but the voice I was hearing sounded demanding and slow. The closer I got, the more I saw my cabin, and when I started running towards it, the creature I saw earlier rose up on its legs, or what seemed like legs. It was taller when I was face to face with it, its eyes staring into my soul, and I thought I was going to die. With lightning speed, the creature ran towards me and I blacked out. I woke up. I was alive in my bed, and my sister was here too. I thought it was just a dream, but noticed she was crying. She was crying in a demonic tone. I got scared and pushed back against my bed. My sister turned around and I saw her eyes ripped out of her sockets, as well as blood all around the house. I passed out again. This time, I woke up in the forest. I felt immense pain near my arm and realized my left arm was bitten off. I saw it. The creature. He was eating my arm. He noticed I was awake and just stared as I screamed for help. I heard a familiar voice once again. It sounded like my dad, but where it was coming from, the more blood I lost. The closer the voice got, and the more the creature started getting aggravated. I thought I was going to die, but then I saw both my parents. This made me flash back into reality, and I realized I was going to have to scream in order for me to be alive. I screamed at the top of my lungs. The creature stood on its legs and threw my arm away. He walked towards me and planned on killing me right then and there. I started crying with the last bit of energy I had left, and I saw them. My mom and my dad. They were there. I then noticed Dad was terrified and was backing away when the creature saw him. Mom threw rocks at it, and the creature ran into the forest. My parents picked me up. I was happy to see them. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was my mom behind my dad getting ripped to shreds by that thing. I heard it again last night, the pacing upstairs. It was midnight when it began. I had just gotten home from working yet another double at the local diner, and all I wanted to do was kick back, relax, and watch a few episodes of whatever sitcom was airing that night, before the exhaustion finally took over and I crashed on the couch, like I had since I first moved in. I did this not necessarily because I was so tired I couldn't make it up the single flight of stairs to my bedroom, but because a part of me, the irrational part, was afraid to. I was afraid to pass the hatch for the attic during the late night hours. Not that I blamed that irrational side of me. The attic was always my least favorite part of the new house, and I absolutely refused to go inside unless I had to, and there was someone else with me. Otherwise, it remained locked. And if I wasn't already in my bedroom when darkness fell, I stayed downstairs, where I slept with the television on until the first signs of morning light woke me. The pacing was quiet at first, just the dull thump 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 of their footfalls as they crossed from one end of the threshold to the other. It was somewhat relaxing if I were being honest, almost like the sound of rain gently hitting the roof, and I soon found myself drifting off to sleep with the light of the TV illuminating the living room. Thump, thump, thud. The sudden crash above my head was enough to pull me out of my daze, and I quickly sat up, my back rigid and my senses on high alert. I fumbled for the remote in the darkness, and once I found it, I muted the volume on the television and strained to hear anything else against the quiet, the blood roaring in my ears. For about a minute, the only sound that was heard was that of my own breathing and the faint hum of the AC as it kicked on. Other than that, there was nothing, and I let out a shaky laugh. It was just the house settling, I told myself. Nothing more, nothing less. I settled back into the couch and turned the volume back on, though I kept it much lower than it previously was in case I heard anything else. But as the seconds turned to minutes, and the silence above my head dragged on, it became increasingly harder to keep my eyes, or find something other than the mindless show to focus on. Before I realized it, my heavy eyelids shut against the dancing light of the television, and the conversations between the actors faded to a lulling whisper of white noise. I began drifting away once more, teetering on the precipice between the land of the conscious and unconscious, when I heard movement in the attic again. Thump, scrape, 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 thump, scrape, thump. It sounded as though something were dragging itself along the floor, something with nails that scratched the wooden boards of the attic as it pulled itself across the room and towards the attic hatch. The breathing caught in my throat as I listened to it crack open the hatch, and for one fleeting moment, I heard whatever or whoever was in there would come to greet me. But then nothing came tumbling down the attic ladder. I let out a sigh of relief and turned my attention back to the television. I'm just feeling tired, I murmured, desperately trying to reassure myself. It's causing me to imagine things. There's a logical explanation to this. There must be. A loose hinge, maybe. An animal trapped inside. I almost began believing myself, until I heard it cackle. My blood ran cold at the unsettling sound, and I scrambled to mute the sitcom for the second time that night before shifting my entire focus to the attic once more. But just as suddenly as the shrill, raspy laughter started, it stopped, and I was left with an intense feeling of dread and unease as the quiet stillness set in. I hoped, like I always did when I heard the pacing, that my mind was playing tricks, or perhaps someone was playing a cruel prank on me in the attic, upstairs, which seemed more plausible between the two. I wouldn't have put it past my friends to cook up something this elaborate in the hopes of scaring me, but there were two problems with that logic. I lived alone, and no one, not even my closest friends, had access to my home. The laughter began again, and as I faced the open hatch one last time, I stared into the entrance of the attic. I caught the gleam of their sharp teeth as they grinned, beckoning for me with jagged nails from the darkness of the open hatch. I never had any friends growing up. It's a sad story of many lonely children. However, as I stand here in the candy aisle of a grocery store, I can't help but think about my first friend. A friend who I loved enjoying every moment with as a child. But as I grew up, I came to know his true, more evil self. I was around the age of 7 when he first came into my life. I remember it was during a nasty thunderstorm. I feared the roaring thunder and hid under my covers for whatever protection they would give. As the thunder roared, wind raged and rain poured against my house. I felt the end of my bed sink in. I slowly rose up from my covers to look, wondering if maybe the roof sprung a leak and rainwater was pouring in. That's when I saw him. A bright bolt of lightning flashed, showing a shadow figure in the shape of a person. I sat there with the covers bunched up to my face. Then the figure turned its head. My heart froze in my chest. The figure had no face, just an empty black mass. I covered myself back in the covers and cowered. What was it? Was it the monster my father always warned me would get me for acting out? I made sure not to be bad the whole week. Then I heard a soothing chuckle. I peeked out from under the covers to see a large, white smile form on the thing's face. It chuckled again. "Don't be afraid," it said, its voice calm and caring. It held out its hand. "Come out, won't you? I won't harm you." I poked my head out. For some reason I felt no ill will from this thing. I sat up on my knees, still covered in my blanket. The thing moved closer to me. It began to ask me questions like, "How was your day?" and "What did you do?" Though this thing scared me when I first saw it, I slowly began to accept it. The next day I woke up still covered in my blanket in a cocoon-like fashion. I wonder if everything I had saw had been a dream. When I moved out of bed, I saw a piece of candy sitting on the edge of my bed. It was a round black ball wrapped in a clear plastic. I don't remember having candy with me last night. My parents forbid any sweets at night. Then, did that thing leave this from me? I feared telling my parents, because they would laugh it off as a child fantasy. Later that night as I laid in bed about to drift off, I felt the same feeling at the end of my bed. I jumped up to see the thing had returned. It smiled that same white smile. It once again asked how my day was. I answered him, but the thing saw the perplexed look on my face. It asked why I gave it such a look. I replied, "What are you? Why are you being so nice to me? Aren't monsters supposed to be mean?" The thing laughed. It shook its head and assured me it didn't want to bring me harm. It had an oath to visit me every day and talk. "A oath?" I asked. "Yeah, aren't friends supposed to have an oath between them?" It said. "Friends?" I would be lying if I said my heart didn't skip a beat from hearing that. Just to have someone say that they wanted to be my friend made me happy. The thing held out its hand. "Friends?" it said. I stared at its long pointed fingers. I held out my hand and the two of us sealed our vow of friendship. After that, my friend would visit me every night. There were even times I would see him during the day. One day he had met me as I was getting off the school bus. Though no one else could see him, I was excited to see him. He could walk me home and ask me about my day at school. He always made sure I had my homework done. My parents took note of me speaking at nothing, but chalked it up to me having an imaginary friend. It never bothered me if no one else could see him. It actually made me feel special, as I had a friend only I could see and speak to. In our talks, we would bring up many different topics, mostly about me and my life. However, there was one night when I asked my friend if he had a family, to which he replied he did, but that he wasn't on good speaking terms with them. He told me that he had fallen out over a new family member, and it caused a great fight among them. My friend was banished and told to never return. I found this story very sad. To be banished by your own family hit me deeply. I couldn't think of what I would do if this happened to me and my family. I mean, I already knew how it felt to have no friends, so to have no family hit me pretty hard. I remember that night I gave him a big hug, which shocked him completely. He told me he found it strange, but just laughed it off. My entire childhood went on like this. I looked up to this friend of mine like an older brother, as someone I could tell my problems to. Years pass and I get older and make actual friends. I stopped seeing my mysterious friend. I wonder if he had made up with his family. I remember feeling sad at the thought of never seeing him again. It wasn't until graduation that I saw him once again. I had just left the stage and bumped into a man wearing a clean black suit and red tie. His hair gelled back. The man seemed ecstatic to me. He reached for my hand and shook it. I was completely taken aback by this man. Who was he? What did he want? Then I saw it. As my eyes wandered down to his shadow, my jaw dropped. The man's shadow was the same wavy flame like the shadow that visited me. Upon seeing my face, the man chuckled. He gave me a pat on the back and began to congratulate me on my graduation. Before I could even reply, he held out his right index finger and thumb. Pressed between them was a single piece of paper. I stared at the single candy. A black round ball wrapped in a clear plastic. The man waved the candy in the air. I slowly took his offering. That is when he smiled and did a 180. I asked him why he stopped visiting me. The man stopped and turned his head slightly to the left. He smiled. The deal was only for a few years. Now if you'll excuse me, I must get what I'm owed. With that, the man seemingly vanished before my eyes. I didn't quite understand what he meant at the time. I stood there for the longest time wondering what he had meant. But at hearing a classmate of mine calling my name, I left it at that. The days that followed, I had moved out of my parents' house into a small apartment. I even got a small job working at a nearby grocery store. Yet not even 3 days after my graduation, I received a call from the police while I was at work. My heart sunk in my chest when the officer on the line informed me my parents had died. They had been in a fatal car accident. From as far as I know, my dad had lost control of the wheel and crashed head-on into an 18-wheeler. The photos showed to me that day revealed a horrific accident. I couldn't even make out my parents when I saw their mutilated bodies. Now I bet you're wondering why I brought up the death of my parents. Well, what the man told me that day lingered in my mind. I began cleaning up my parents' house and storing away their belongings. I had my own place ever since graduation, and I didn't want to stay at the house for the memories. I found a salesperson who helped me find some buyers for the house. While cleaning the house, I stumbled upon something. At first, I thought it to be old papers my dad had never shredded. But looking over it more, I saw the papers had strange markings on them, written in a red color. I stared down at the floor to see a pentagram, and 6 candles melted down to their base. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this a ritual site? Did some young idiots happen to sneak into my parents' home and practice their dark craft? However, staring at it made my mind remember that man's words. I must collect what is owed. Had my parents conjured up a demon to be my friend? Was it worth their life? I snuck my right hand into my pocket, pulling out the candy the man had given me. I stood there wondering why my parents did what they did. I unwrapped the candy and stuffed it into my mouth, though I do not know why they did what they did, or why the thing even took the deal. There is one thing I do know. The devil loves the taste of licorice. Wyoming is one of the largest states in America, covering nearly 98,000 square miles. Despite its size, Wyoming has less than 600,000 residents, making it one of the least populated states in the US. Its history is as rich and as dark as the coal that fills the endless stream of boxcars winding their way across the western plains. Many battles and a great deal of blood have been shed by both the white man and the Native Americans in the fight over the land and its resources. So, you can well imagine many residents believe the land is cursed. There are countless stories of paranormal activity, from ghost encounters, Bigfoot sightings, to skinwalker and cryptid encounters, not to mention stories of UFOs and alien abductions. I have had many supernatural encounters over the years. This story, however, is not about spirits or anything of that nature. It is about a cryptid of sorts that countless people have seen and written about, but still have not been able to prove its actual existence. I happen to be one of those people. As a kid, my family and I would often go camping at Lake Desmet, just outside of Buffalo. These camping trips often included taking the boat out for some water skiing and or fishing. On one particular trip, my father and I were fishing in the middle of the lake. The water was so calm and still, it almost resembled glass. The glare from midsummer sun, reflection off the water, was nearly blinding. Still, we talked lazily about everything and nothing. I recall my father commenting on the fact he thought it was rather strange the fish were not biting at all. He stated it was as if something had scared them all away. I didn't give what he said much thought, as I was preoccupied by the sudden ripples that began to dance across the water, giving the lake's surface funhouse mirror effect. I recall thinking it was rather odd for this to be occurring, considering there was not a boat, or anybody for that matter, in sight. My heart began to pound in my chest, as the ripples soon turned into waves and slapped against the side of the boat with enough force to cause it to rock back and forth. Judging from the look on my father's face, I could tell he too was feeling uneasy about the current situation. "Dad, are you seeing this?" I asked, trying to keep my fear from creeping into my voice. "I am," is all he could say, his eyes nervously scanning the lake. I should point out that the lake is said to have a depth of 70 feet on average and 130 feet at its deepest. Others say nobody really knows how deep it truly is. There are countless stories regarding a creature known as Smetty. Descriptions of this cryptid are as varied as the sightings. Some describe it as a giant eel with a horse-like head, while others say it resembles an enormous alligator. Most witnesses describe the lake monster as a classic Loch Ness-style creature. Now keep in mind, I had heard all of the stories and truly believed they were just telltales. However, all the doubt I had was blown out of the water as I watched what looked like the head and neck of a massive sea creature rise from out of the depths. About 50 yards from the boat, we watched in silence as the creature lazily drifted across the water, as if it didn't have a care in the world. Needless to say, my father and I were peeing ourselves with excitement and fear. It was my father that finally broke the silence. "Well, I'll be damned. That damn thing does exist," he whispered. "Yeah," I whispered back. Neither of us had thought to bring a camera, so there was no way to get a picture of the encounter. To be honest, even if we would have, we were both so shaken I doubt either of us would have gotten a decent picture of it. We just sat there staring in awe and disbelief for what seemed like hours. In truth, the whole encounter lasted maybe all of 2 minutes before the lake creature disappeared beneath the lake's surface. My father and I looked at one another, and without speaking, quickly began reeling in our lines. "Well, I guess we know why the fish were not biting," I pointed out. "Indeed," my father replied, with a slight shiver. "I think it's time for us to get the hell out of this lake," he suggested. I nodded my head in agreement. Without another word, my father cranked the boat's motor, and we hauled ass back to shore, cautiously keeping an eye out for the monster. I have been back to Lake Desmond many times since then, and have yet to see the creature. However, sightings and stories continue to circulate. Although there is still no actual proof Smetty exists, I know without doubt that it indeed does. If any of you have seen it or heard about this elusive creature, I would love to hear from you.